All right, everybody. Familiar faces, how will Saya? We're talking about innovation and inclusion. And at the intersection of that is technology. We think a lot about technology at Mastercard. We like to think of ourselves as a tech company. Technology is a two-sided sword. In many ways, it creates a lot of opportunity. Billions of people have been pulled into a digital economy. At the same time, it causes some issues. And as of late, people are worried about the issues that AI might bring about. Is that, which side of the sword are we going to strike with when we implement AI at a broader scale? Now, there's a lot of challenges going on, so we know all of them, so I don't need to repeat. But climate change has not been solved. We're dealing with the consequences of a pandemic, and there's a ground war in Europe, and so forth. So the stakes are high. And there's a risk that when we think about innovation and inclusion, that the inclusion part gets forgotten because we focus on the short term. And inclusion is oftentimes a longer term undertaking. So how do we get it right? And how do we make sure we keep that balance? That's what we're going to talk about right now. It takes technology, that's what we do, and it takes an ecosystem that gets technology to thrive. And that is what the IFC does, amongst many other things that the IFC does. So I'm delighted to be here with Makhtar Diop, the Managing Director of the IFC. This is not an interview. We are actually going to try to have a conversation with each other and have you witness our chat. So I want to kick us off thinking about innovation and inclusion, and how do we align one with the other? And that's taking a look back before we take a look ahead. So at the IFC, what have you learned over the last 3 years? With everything that was going on, what do we need to do going forward? What do we need to get right?
We need to, Michael, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I'm not as cool actually today. I have my tie because we have our spring meeting. So otherwise I would have been without a tie.
I put my tie back on later.
Yeah, but it's just no. But what we learned is that first of all we need innovation. Innovation is important. When you have innovation, you can adjust to the new reality. And we have seen it. For instance, a lot of companies in emerging economies had a problem were a profitable company, but with this shock, they find themselves in a difficult situation. So we developed things like the distress assess recovery program, which help companies who were profitable to be able to go through this period, which was quite difficult. We also worked on ensuring that we bring more working capital. We also think that investment or equity is the only thing that we need to bring for a company. But working capital and trade finance was very important. We realized with this crisis, a lot of smallholders were not able to access trade financing, be able to export, be able to go to market. We realized also that it was important to work on the value chain, the local value chain, because the international and global value chain were disrupted. You had the farmers in Africa who couldn't access some markets, some small market manufacturing companies who couldn't access the markets. But also we learned that while we are doing that, we need to work on global public goods, such as climate change. And there was an opportunity here to be able to address within this crisis, and when we are revisiting the business plan of some of the company, to look at it in that perspective, and to ensure that they can be part of the rebound when the rebound is in place. Lastly, it was a good opportunity also to do some reforms. And I think tech was very important in that process. I was part, and I'm still part of the Broadband Commission. And we have the ITU and other bodies work on what we call the Moonshot Africa, which was how to accelerate access to digital services in Africa so that people can respond to the crisis. And we developed a lot of South-South cooperation. For instance, the traceability mechanism and technology that was developed by the Korean was extremely useful to be able to increase traceability in lower-income country, and therefore to stop the growth of the progression of COVID virus. So all these kind of things were happened during this time. We were able to increase our lending, and building on that, we have this year we will be certainly having a record year of lending. This is a good news, but it's because we've been able at that time to identify better the needs of some of those companies which are facing those shocks.
You know, I can just say that this bridge between short-term and long-term when it comes to inclusion, the IFC has been really helpful to be that long-term lender while everybody else is really focusing short-term.
Yeah. But we did it with you also. You help us very much because what the solutions that you have developed, a lot of the architecture that you help building in financial inclusion were extremely useful for other type of public response. To give you a sense, a lot of the government were trying to transfer resources to the lower income during the crisis, so as form of social safety net and others. And it's because there were investment, and we saw a huge difference between countries where you had an investment before and good policy on financial inclusion, and those who were able to respond very quickly to the crisis. So you did a lot of good.
A lot of learnings. Now, when you do a conversation versus an interview, this would be the question, the time when Makhtar asked me something. So, but you know, one of the topics that we said we should be talking about was, you know, where is technology going? So what are you guys seeing? What are we seeing? And one of the bigger themes here is, with all these challenges and complexities going on, there's one common theme that is affecting all of us. And it's fundamentally a good thing, which is the world is getting more digital. Yeah. So if we think about that trend overall, and we start to think what that means for all of us and what it means for inclusion and innovation and so forth, just how fast this digitization of the world is accelerating is really fascinating. I'll give you a factoid. At the end of 2022, for the first time, the US consumer online spend, i.e. internet and so forth, crossed $1 trillion. It doubled in 4 years. And you know, the part of the pandemic is in it where we all needed to do things online because there was no other option. Not all, but certainly in developed countries where that was available. At the same time, you talked about broadband, Makhtar. The people online and on this planet, the number increased from 53% in 2019 to 64% in 2021. We added 800 million people. That's a lot of progress. Nevertheless, 64%, there's 36% are not online at all. And that is where I think the pushes you heard from Hans earlier on and so forth. So in this rapidly digitizing world, how do we focus on something that's really relevant? And the way we think about this as a company, and that many of our private sector and public sector partners talk about this, is in a principled fashion. You know, the next dog walking app might not be the most relevant solution. So asking the question, what is the real problem out there? Who has what problem that is an unlock for a path to growth? You know, things come to mind when you think about who's been hardest hit by the pandemic. Small business. What is small business's biggest problem? Is access to capital. How do you do that? Well, you can solve that with AI. You can solve that with a range of technologies from open banking, fintech, and so forth. I won't bore you with the details. So principle number one, is it solving a problem? Principle number two has to be trustworthy. There's a lot of people right now that worry about how many times do you get an SMS a day that says your Netflix account has been compromised? Well, there you go. Is that trust inspiring? No. Imagine you have just joined the digital ecosystem, then you're going to be freaked out by stuff like that. So trust, does it solve a real problem? Is it trustworthy? And the last aspect of it needs to be inclusive. Now, this is the Inclusive Growth Summit. So of course, we're going to talk about inclusion, and we think about that at the center of inclusive growth all day long. But it makes good business sense. If it's not inclusive, it's not going to scale. And if it doesn't scale, it doesn't matter. So it makes good business sense for us to do that. So that's how I look at the technology part of the ecosystem and where we drive where we drive inclusion. And now, of course, we're 9 minutes in. We have not talked about ChatGPT. So this is not a good conversation if we don't. So very quickly, I mean, the way we look at it, we cannot afford not to lean into AI. All these challenges, we need to innovate ourselves out of it. So we're looking for investment partners, long-term partners across the private sector that have trustworthy AI that we can lean into. And that is important. It has now been available to so many more people. My wife told me over the weekend she just asked ChatGPT to redo her LinkedIn profile. And she said it's so much better. So, so there you go. It's very practical. For us, nothing new. More important for us is the general theme of AI, cloud, 5G, get solutions to more people to solve real problems everywhere in the world. But trust in technology is only one thing. Finance, the ecosystem, VCs, everything that's around it. Without that, we cannot operate. We need you. And I'd be curious about your view on.
No, absolutely, Michael. Actually, it's interesting. AI is. Actually, we have a panel this afternoon, which will include
at the World Bank.
At the World annual meetings, not here.
Right, okay, because I didn't know about that panel.
But that panel. But what is interesting in that panel is we have a woman from Africa, she's Senegalese, I'm sorry, who is the first tenure, so second black woman computer professor tenured in a tenure track in Ivy League University. And she specialized in AI. So it shows that and there are also a lot of other Africans somewhere in the world who are doing similar work. I was yesterday with the CEO of OCP talking about what they're doing on AI, and they were talking that they are running now mines with IoT only. So the world is, and the good, there's a lot of good, but also we have to be careful to make sure that we have the right. But there's something we don't talk enough about is cybersecurity, which is also an important risk that we have seen during the pandemic. And I was visiting Silicon Valley, and I was visiting Cisco a couple of years ago. And I will be surprised that day what the monitoring system of Cisco was showing as a source of the largest number of attacks in the world. Guess which country was it? It was Zimbabwe.
Okay, all right, I was not guessing
that. Nobody would have guessed that. It's clear that someone hacked an IP address from there and was playing with that. So it means that another African country, 2 months later, had all their banking system shut down because of cybersecurity. So let's not forget that. Second is the policy framework to be able for you to develop all these new applications which we are helping and addressing the last mile. Data localization is a very important debate today. We have data center being built in a lot of emerging economies, and there is a different view about data localization. Infrastructure sharing is an important topic also that we are discussing that will be essential in helping broadband coverage. The third one is how we can have a sandbox regulation to be able for you to apply all this innovation in countries. So I see that you are doing a lot of that, Michael. Can you give us some example of what you have been doing in the pushing the regulation of your innovation?
Right. So one of the things when it comes to scaling technology is a regulatory framework that aligns across borders, because of course technology doesn't really know any borders, the digital economy doesn't. And we're finding that there's high degrees of fragmentation that's not helpful. So we like what the IFC is doing and driving that dialogue. We're trying to do the same thing. I think a really interesting case study is in data privacy. The Europeans took the pen back in 17, 18 and started to write something called the GDPR, which is a data privacy bill, basically. And you think about where we are today, we still have many, many large economies where there is no clear data privacy landscape, regulation, and you start to think of what that does to scaling solutions when people don't trust them because they don't know where their data is going, who's benefiting from it, who's selling it, and so forth. So a way I think where the private sector is needed, we should partner with you and we should do things together. We need to talk to the regulators, but also the private sector has an obligation, I think, to lean in before and self-regulate. So what we've done at the time, it's just an example, we're just a small part of the story, is to say, all right, what does thousands of pages of regulation actually mean? It means you own your data, you control it, you benefit it because it's your data. And it's the industry's job to keep it safe, as simple as that. We actually turned that into a data standard for the company and we took it beyond Europe, around the world. So think about the crypto winter. So we are 15 minutes in and we haven't talked about crypto. So that's second check mark. So we're there. And you know, part of why some of this, I think it's fair to say, trust was lost throughout the crypto winter and some of the failures of some of the exchanges. I think a regulatory clarity would be a good thing. But I think it will always be true that technology is faster than regulation. So this is where this GDPR example comes in the middle. I think we need to lean in, be responsible, find the common threats, talk to multilaterals like you, Makhtar, and your team, to regulators and so forth. So I'm going to put my tie on later on and talk to more central bank governors about exactly these kind of topics.
Now, you're perfectly right. And I just want to illustrate how important it is. On some of the financial inclusion experience that was most successful and quoted often in Africa, in Kenya. In fact, the technical solution existed somewhere else in Africa, actually in West Africa, well before. The difference was the central bank attitude towards that. In Kenya, they accepted to have some sandbox regulation. In other places, they didn't want to do it. And that's what really I see as a major obstacle for innovation and be able to test it. But also what is interesting in this is that, and you were telling me, I'm just quoting you, Michael, is that you use often what is happening in considered as low-income countries as a place where you have more innovation that is exported in markets which are supposedly more sophisticated. So the knowledge process is not linear, is not one way as is used and is perceived to be. It's much more dynamic and that. And it brings me to something that I didn't mention, is the word venture capital and VCs.
Okay.
And we have seen a fall in VCs in 2022. So this is something that we need to really look into. But unfortunately, even in time when there were a larger, important amount of investment in VCs, only a fraction was going to low-income countries. Only 1% of VC financing was going to Africa. This is something that needs to be changed. And the responsibility is multiple. First of all, African billionaires need to invest more in VCs. They don't do enough of that. Secondly, we need to attract more capital and create an ecosystem. I take Africa as an example of low-income countries, but it also applied to South Asia and so forth. We need to create an ecosystem which is more viable. We also, as IFC, trying to do more in that area. We put a fund of $225 million for VCs in Africa and Middle East. We are trying to do more mobilization of capital, but this is just as a surface. So I think that one of the things that I would like to leave maybe this audience is that a lot of the innovations that we are seeing that will be helping for financial inclusion will require more VCs and to partner with you and link the banking sector, the traditional banking sector, with solutions on financial inclusion that you've developed.
A practical, hopeful outlook and suggestion. So we appreciate the partnership, Makhtar, and your driving partnership with many other companies. That's important. So that broader table is needed. And what's coming out of these conversations with an IFC oftentimes is that innovation so inclusion cannot be a choice. Innovation needs to be by design. Innovation needs to be just built in what we do because it's long-term business building. Therefore, it makes sense, good sense for business. You're the private sector arm of the World Bank Group. We're definitely private sector, but we're really including more and more people. We're getting better at it every year. And on that note, we'll leave you to your next panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.